Just over 20 years ago, John Perkins wrote a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. In it, Perkins admits to having been an agent who worked to sabotage and shape the economies of the so-called Third World to serve Western interests. Operating in a shadowy role as an economic consultant on behalf of different American corporations, banks, the US government, and even the major financial agency of the United Nations, the IMF, Perkins and his colleagues would find ways to keep their target countries under the heel of Western powers, convincing them to take loans that they didn't need to launch massive infrastructure projects on credit that they'd never be able to afford. This rigged game would leave generations perpetually indebted to Western powers, while their own natural resources were plundered from underneath their feet. Up next, let's talk to John Perkins to find out which countries he personally fleeced, which ones are currently being looted, and whether anything has changed in the global economic order since his days as an economic hitman. You're watching The InnerView. Very happy to have John Perkins with us on The InnerView. John, your act of confession and contrition has educated millions of us around the world and makes people think about the way the world works. More than 20 years on, tell me how it feels that a lot of people still don't get it.
Well, yeah, it's shocking to me how naive people are, particularly in my own country, the United States. I think people around the world get the book, get the idea more strongly than people in the United States. And the recent elections here of Donald Trump have really proven that. As an example, the third edition of the book, which is called, which is about China's economic hitmen, was recently published in China, which I did not expect because it's very critical of China. But it was published there, and I'm getting a lot of interviews and feedback from China. I think people in China really understand what's going on in the United States, and to some degree, China has taken this position over as economic hitman. But in the United States, it appears we really don't get it here. A large majority of people just don't get it.
Okay, so we'll revisit where we're at right now in terms of who's doing what, who might be, under the heel of the United States or the Chinese. But I want to step back for a while now, and I want to ask you directly, which countries were you involved in? For those who haven't read your many excellent books, which countries were you involved in fleecing?
Well, because I speak Spanish fluently, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Latin America. I was focused on Latin America, South America, Central America, but I also worked extensively in Indonesia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, and to some degree Egypt. So I was involved in the Middle East and Asia also. My main focus, however, was Latin America.
I remember Richard Kapuscinski in his book about the Shah of Iran writing that development is a treacherous river, as those who dive into its currents will tell you. Tell me if you came across anybody during those days, any leader, who didn't buy what you were selling, who didn't want to take the offer that they couldn't refuse.
Absolutely. Two presidents did not accept the offer. The president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and the head of Panama, Omar Torrijos. And as a result of them not taking that, I think as a result, they both died in private plane crashes within 3 months of each other. And a tremendous amount of evidence points toward those plane crashes as having been assassinations. There's never been a smoking gun found. There's no concrete evidence that those were assassinations, but I believe they were, as much of the world believes they were, especially in those countries.
So the people like you would be one arm of a system, and the other arm would be what? The assassins, the CIA, what?
Yeah, what we call the jackals. So basically, I'd go into a president of a country and I'd say, here in this hand, I've got billions of dollars. for you and your people. It's going to help you. It's going to help your
Mm,
friends and the
mm,
cronies, the people that own the big industries. We're going to build it. But you're going to have to use this money to hire our corporations, our construction engineering companies, to build big infrastructure projects like electric power systems and highways and ports. These will really help you and your friends,
mm,
and of course, make huge profits for our companies. But if you don't take this money in this hand, I get a gun.
mm.
Now, I didn't actually carry a gun, but there were people we call the jackals right behind me who were usually CIA assets. And all these leaders knew. They know what had happened to Mossadegh in
Right.
Iran. They knew what happened to Allende in Chile, and on, Lumumba in the Congo, and
Mm,
on and on. The presidents were, pretty. It was my job was pretty easy because most of the presidents would take this, the
mm.
billions of dollars. But with those two particular ones, they did not play the game.
Right. And I guess if I go to a bank and I want a loan, or if the bank comes to me, like in your case, and says, hey, we want to offer you a loan, if you have a property or something, that's your collateral, right? So with these countries, their collateral was the oil or the gas or whatever their natural resources were, right? So did you go into it knowing for sure, absolutely, that they would never be able to pay off these loans, that this would be rigged in such a way that they're going to need all these infrastructure projects, nuclear power plants, whatever it may be, and ultimately when they default, that's when you come in and say, well, just like the bank has to take your house, we have to take your oil. Did you know that every time?
Well, Imran, I don't think there's ever 100%. But yes, within 95% probability, I probably knew that they would not be able to repay their loans. That their interest, that they would pay the interest on the loans,
Mm,
and that would actually hurt the majority of the people in the country because money would be diverted from social services like education and
mm,
healthcare to pay off the interest. But in the end, the principal probably wouldn't be repaid. And I'll tell you, if in fact it seemed like they were getting able to repay the principal, well, we would go in and find a reason to get them to take a little bit more loan. Well, we built this project, we're building it, but it needs to
mm,
expand.
mm,
So, our experts are telling us that you've got to accept another $1 billion, in loans.
mm. At what point did you start to feel guilty? At what point did you start to feel that you were doing something morally wrong?
Well, I had this job for 10 years. And during the first 7 of those years, I thought I was doing the right thing.
Mm,
Because in business school, I had learned, and the World Bank says, and all the authorities tell you that if you want to help a poor country develop, invest a lot of money in infrastructure. And you can show that the gross domestic product, the economy of the country, does grow when you do that. But and so I believe that. I thought I was doing the right thing. And we have this measure called GDP per capita, per
mm,
person, which makes it sound like everybody's getting this share. But after 7 years, especially with the help of Omar Torrijos of Panama, who really took me under his wing and taught me before he was taken down in a plane crash, I came to understand that GDP only measures how well the rich are doing, and
mm,
how well the big industries are doing, how well foreign corporations are doing. It really doesn't measure the majority of the people. GDP per capita is it's a smokescreen,
mm,
it's a lie. And so after about 7 years, I began to understand this. But I have to say, Imran, that it was hard to get out. People put a lot of pressure on me not to get out. I was making a lot of money. I come from a relatively poor teacher's family in rural America, and now I'm flying first class around the world, staying in the finest hotels, wining and dining with presidents. It took me another 3 years to really convince myself
mm.
that I had to get out and devote the rest of my life to exposing this system and trying to change it.
When you say that GDP is not an accurate indicator, I thought of that great line in Confessions of an Economic Hitman when Trump decided or had signaled his plan for Gaza, basically wiping it clear, ethnically cleansing Gaza and saying we're going to go in and rebuild it. I thought of that line in your book where you say that you can carpet bomb a place and completely destroy it and then rebuild it, and the economic indicators will say there's growth, right? And so
Yeah.
if these metrics are not the correct way, economically, politically, morally, not the correct way at looking at what is really growth, abundance, prosperity. How should we measure growth, abundance, prosperity?
Well, I think that it's fairly easy to develop matrices, methods for measuring how well people are actually doing. What's the level of nutrition? What's the level of education? What's the level of a number of people that get clean, potable water and good, healthy food consistently? What are the wage rates like? What is the real average income in a country, and how does that measure against what we might call a basket of foods? Like can people live off the minimum wage or the average wage in a country? And if you can provide a measure that says people can live well, and the majority of people are living well in this country, and they're even able to save some money, which is always good for an economy, then you can say that that country is doing well. We don't measure that in most places. There's some attempts to do that. That people talk about Bhutan and the happiness measurement index and so on and so forth. So we know very well how to do that. But the great powers of the world, which has been the United States up until very recently, and now China's taking that position, they don't really want to measure those things. They want to measure the things that will help them steal resources from countries around the world.
I suppose it must bring you some level of comfort that when people, whether left-wing or right-wing, when they talk about the Allende's or the Mossadeghs or the Lumumbas, they're like, yeah, we did it. Yeah, from the sort of Western perspective, right? The CIA did it. Yeah, we probably did it. I suppose, and I didn't live through it, but during that time, mentioning it would seem to be a conspiracy theory. You seem to be crazy to even mention. Why would we get involved in that sort of stuff? No, we don't do it. It's their own internal dynamics, right? So with that in mind, what do you think is currently happening right now that might be considered a conspiracy theory if you talked out loud about it?
Well, in fact, right now I'm talking out loud about the absurdity and the immorality, if you will, the exploitative moves of the Trump administration to, for example, try to reclaim the Panama Canal, and even to, kind of threaten to invade the country if they don't, and with Greenland and Canada, and on and on, so I'm getting a lot of pushback because I'm speaking out against those things. The Panama Canal belongs to the Panamanians. And for the United States now to claim that we have any right to take over that canal is absurd. We are in the argument that we need to protect the canal against China is ridiculous. The U.S. Fourth Fleet is right off the Panama Canal in the Caribbean Ocean, and there's no way China's going to take over that canal from a military standpoint, and I don't think China has any desire to. So these sorts of things are continuing now, and it's a constant battle. And here in the United States, we have this incredible attitude. A large number of people have this incredible misunderstanding of what our foreign affairs are all about.
But it's interesting because that is happening and seems to be a similar playbook of empire. Bend the knee or we'll smash you up. You are part of it, right? But then on the other hand, there's this other side to it where Trump and Musk say we're cleaning the swamp, and U.S. aid is a mess, and it's terrible, and we're going to go and fix it because these organizations are corrupt. The IMF is corrupt. So it's very difficult for people to try to figure out who are the good guys. Is that me reading too much into it?
No, I don't think that's reading too much into it, but I do think, Imran, that we're very divided in that way, and people are very entrenched in their belief systems in the United States. And it's, the idea of fixing the system, I like that. Yes, I think there's a lot of waste that goes on in the American, and especially in the federal government, and it needs to be cleaned up to some degree. But cleaning it up or fixing it doesn't mean shutting it down.
Right.
And it doesn't even shutting it down temporarily. or laying people off who will never come back to those jobs no matter what happens.
Okay, let's switch to the Chinese now. You mentioned them up top. I mean, I know very recently Sri Lanka had a terrible economic disaster, and they're still recovering from it. Built into some of the criticism of their economic policies, they were indebted to the Chinese over this port, right, where they took this big loan from the Chinese, and they'd be paying it off. Their great grandchildren would be still paying off this loan. Is China, as it is right now, as it flexes its power, its muscle, politically, economically, is it operating by a similar playbook to the United States in how it operated?
Yes, I think that China's goal is very similar, but its approach is different. Its economic hitmen are much more efficient, in fact, than we were, and they have an amazing story to tell. China's economic hitman can go to the leader of a country in Africa or Latin America and say, "Hey, look, in China we had 10% economic growth for 30 years. We brought 900 million people out of poverty. Nobody else has ever done that, certainly not the United States. And so which system do you like better?" And then go in and offer the loans and build these projects. And then, as I think I mentioned earlier in my most recent book in the Economic Hitman trilogy, just came out a little over a year ago, it's very critical of China, but goes into all these things. And incidentally, I taught at an MBA program in China. I got to know their system very well. Uh, and yet it's just been published in China, which I find very interesting. But in that book, I talk about how all of these different approaches that China's taken are so much more efficient. They've learned, their economic hitmen have learned from our mistakes and our success, and they're doing a bang-up job. I don't know whether you can get a good look at this, but
Yeah.
in the last 20 years, the world has gone from the United States had 80% of the world's trade with 80% of the world's country, top trading partner. Today it's China.
Right. I mean, so just to be clear, red China, blue US, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so it's completely reversed itself in
Right.
just 25 years, which attests to the efficiency of China's economic hitman.
Right.
And our failure. The United States has just we've wasted tremendous amount of resources that we devoted to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and many other places. And ever since 9/11, we've pretty much ignored Latin America and Africa and other parts of Asia and the Middle East, focusing on these few countries. China hasn't gotten bogged down in wars it can't win. It's devoted its resources to developing trade with so much of the rest of the world. And you're quite right. Some of the they put countries in bad debt. Sorry, as you mentioned earlier about Sri Lanka. So they're not the good guys, but they are the effective, efficient guys. And meanwhile, the United States has really stumbled over itself.
We spoke about the Lumumbas and the Allendes and so on, Mossadeghs. Are there any examples that are sort of gray for you? I mean, I was never an economic hitman, but and you know infinitely more about this than I do, but when say a Gaddafi is overthrown, or a Saddam Hussein, there are those who would say Saddam Hussein was standing up to the West, therefore he wasn't playing ball, therefore they went in to destroy him. Gaddafi, and so on. But at the same time, there's abundant evidence that these were tyrants, these were dictators who oppressed their people, who massacred people, who did very many terrible things as well. So maybe the two things are true at the same time. Maybe it's a bit more of one and a bit more of another. Are there any complicated ones that are in the shades of gray for you?
The world's in a shade of gray, Imran, in a way. It's well, you come from a country that has an incredible history of empire. Turkey, what's today Turkey, at one time controlled so much of the world at that time in a similar way. This goes back in history. This approach so long, but traditionally empires have been built using the military. For a brief period of time between the end of the Vietnam War and 9/11, the United States was extremely successful at building an empire using economics and very little military force. There was always that threat of
Mm,
military force or assassination and overthrow of governments. But for the most part, it was economics. And now China's taking that same route. And the United States, in the meantime, got really bogged down, went back to the old process after 9/11 of sending in the military. Uh, but I think in all of these cases, uh, yeah, we ought to ask ourselves, what's the goal here? Is the goal in getting rid of Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, getting rid of a despotic dictator and making sure that he's replaced by some benign leadership? Or is the goal just to steal resources and to take over part of the world?
mm,
And fortunately, I think history tells us that usually it's a
right.
very selfish, greedy goal.
Are you
And
more
and
yeah, are you more aligned? Sorry to interrupt you. Are you more aligned with the idea that, well, there's basically they're all human rights abusers, but you highlight the ones that you want to go after who might have something that you need, and you ignore those of you, the excesses of your allies, for example?
yeah, well, the driving force for me today, and what I write about all the time, is the fact that the system I promoted has created a death economy,
Mm,
a global economic system that's consuming and polluting itself toward extinction. Frankly,
mm,
climate change and income inequality and species extinction. Those are all problems, but they're based on a death economy that's based on extreme materialism, ripping up the world's resources, short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs, maximizing short-term profits. And we need to move to a different system, a life economy that pays people to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environments, to recycle, to create new technologies that are able to provide energy from the air and from water.
mm.
There's such an opportunity here. And so my guiding principle would be that we work with those countries and corporations and people who are really dedicated to doing this. And there has been a movement for the last several decades of getting more and more into solar and wind and electric cars and other such things. Here in the United States, there's a setback right now. But so for me, if I were in charge of things now, I would be supportive of leaders who implement these kinds of policies and be opposed to leaders that continue to take us down the course of self-destruction.
Are we in a dangerous phase right now?
Extremely, extremely. I think there's this business of trade wars, the threat of trade wars, and even the threat of nuclear war is extremely dangerous. And right now, for example, in the United States, we're totally focused on xenophobia, on nationalism, on internal politics, and that's happening around the world at this moment. That people aren't really looking at the bigger
Mm,
problems, the problem of the death economy, the problem that we've created systems
mm,
that are taking us toward disaster, toward destruction of the world as we know it. We
mm,
won't destroy the world, but we'll destroy the world as we know it,
mm.
and the one that's in for human beings like you and me.
My final question to you: you've spun around the sun a few more times than most of us. You've just turned 80. Happy
That's
birthday.
correct. Thank
You've
you.
still got a great head of hair. I don't know how you do it. Very impressive. You look fit, healthy, sharp. In these 80 years, what's the most important lesson that you've learned? What is the most important lesson in life?
Well, personally speaking, I asked myself 5 questions that I suggest everybody ask themselves. This is the most important lesson, to ask these questions frequently. What do I most want to do for the rest of my life?
Mm,
One. Two, how can I do that in a way that helps transform the death economy to a life economy? So I want to write. I love to write. And so the second one, I'll write about things that inspire people to do that. I have a friend who's a carpenter who wants to work with his hands in wood, but he would say that he wants to use only sustainable materials and replant trees. And the third question is, what's stopping me? What's
Mm.
holding me back from doing what I most want to do for the rest of my life in a way that creates a better world? And the fourth question is, when I confront what's stopping me, uh, how can I change my perception? So for a writer, I might say, well, I don't have enough time to really be a good writer. And for the carpenter, might say, well, my clients don't want to pay the extra price
Mm.
for sustainable material. So when you confront those questions, you don't run from them. You really look at them. You say, well, the writer says, well, I can turn off the television for a couple hours every night and write. And my carpenter friend says, I'll tell my clients that the added price is not a cost, it's an investment in the future.
Mm.
And the fifth question, what actions do I take? So the most important lesson I've learned, Imran, is to ask myself those questions and then to really work hard to move in the direction of creating a world that my grandson and all of his brothers and sisters in Egypt, in Turkey, in Brazil, and Argentina will want to inherit. All people all over the world. How can we make this world one that our progeny will be grateful for?
That's beautiful. John, we are out of time. John Perkins, the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman and many other books, but that's what you're most famous for, from 2004. It's been a pleasure meeting you and talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, my pleasure indeed, Imran, and thank you for all you do to bring these things out into the open. I
Thanks a lot.
deeply, deeply appreciate your work.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot. Take care.